Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Even before David Cameron made it to Downing Street, the Tories had an election winner in Boris Johnson, who is coming to the end of 2 terms as London Mayor, and the party's proposed replacement is another old Etonian who's pursued his own highly independent line on issues such as the environment and the expansion of Heathrow. Can Zac Goldsmith hold the capital for his party? He's with me now. Good morning to you. Zac, are you a Eurosceptic?
Yes, I've always been Eurosceptic. I mean, I believe that the European institutions are profoundly undemocratic, unaccountable, and far too centralised. And what I'd like to see is exactly the promise that was in the manifesto on which I stood. I would like to see the Prime Minister deliver meaningful reforms so that Eurosceptic non-headbangers, I wouldn't describe myself as a headbanger on this issue, but the mild... Well, there are plenty of headbangers on the issue. I would like to see a meaningful reform package so that people with anxieties about the European Union, like myself, could vote to stay in, and I wish him well. It's a very tough job. It's a very tough job. Not a job that I envy.
Liam Fox has talked about the Prime Minister going around Europe with a begging bowl at the moment. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, look, he's in the middle of a very intense negotiation. I think, by the way, if he succeeds, this is going to benefit the whole of Europe, not just the UK. It's a really tough job. If you put yourself into his shoes at this moment, it's a very tough gig. I think that he is doing as good a job as he's able to do at the moment. But it is tough. And when he comes back, people like me, and the beautiful thing about a referendum is it takes it out of the hands of politicians and it gives that decision to people. People will look at the package as a whole and they'll take a view.
So do you genuinely not know how you're going to vote at this point?
No, I've deliberately prevented myself from taking a view because, as a courtesy to the Prime Minister, knowing that he's got a very, very tough job on his hands, I want to judge the final offer as a whole. And like everyone watching this programme, I will take a view based on the national interest, and I can be persuaded either way. My starting position hasn't changed. I'm a Eurosceptic. I want meaningful reform. But at the same time, you know, that's what I'm hoping the Prime Minister will achieve.
Michael Howard has said that he doesn't think it's very likely we're going to get meaningful reform. Do you agree with that?
Look, I don't want to preempt it. It's tough, and we don't really know. Every single newspaper today has a different take on what the Prime Minister is likely to bring back and how those reforms are going. I don't know. I'm not part of those reforms. I wish him well, and I hope that he's put the bar sufficiently high to be able to persuade people that it is in our interest to stay in. But, you know, people will take a view.
Because as Mayor of London, if that happens, you will be in charge of the city with a massive, massive effect on the British economy. And now we know that some of the big banks are determined to stay in. Goldman Sachs has already paid a lot of money towards the In campaign at the moment. So you could find yourself potentially in confrontation with some of your biggest, as it were, financial constituents in London, couldn't you?
Well, I take issue with you on one point. I don't believe business speaks with one voice on this issue.
No, sure, of course not.
So the Federation of Small Business, the Chamber of Commerce, the CBI, all take different views.
But the big banks tend to be on the other side.
So big business tends to be more likely to want to stay in. Smaller businesses tend to be more likely to want to come out. But business does not speak with one voice. I mean, there have been suggestions by Goldman Sachs and other spokesmen from other big companies that the city has jitters over the referendum itself. But the referendum is going to happen. Whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. I happen to think it's a very good thing. No one's been asked their opinion since I was born, 1975. You have to be 59 to have been asked your opinion on Europe. So I think it is a good thing. But whether or not it is a good thing, it is happening. So we're going to have to deal with that. And it's important that whatever we decide, whether to come out or to stay in, it has a democratic mandate, something that is deeply lacking in the project at the moment. I don't think that's negotiable.
OK, so you will have heard possibly in the paper review we were talking about the effect on London of big money pouring in. There's a report in The Observer from some academics suggesting the London political elite are the kind of valets and ushers for the super, super rich, and there is a lot of money laundering going on. What kind of mayor are you going to be in that regard?
So you do not want to turn the taps off on the overseas investment in London. London has boomed under Boris Johnson. I mean, even Labour would accept, I think, that London has boomed for the last 8 years. There is a problem, though, that even though people can see the success in London, they can see the cranes going up and the buildings being built, and they can see that London is buzzing.
But it's not their London. They can't afford to live there.
That's the issue, is that too many people in London now feel that they've been priced out of their own city. And it's not just a feeling they have. So we've reached a point today where even if you earn double the London average salary, you're still not going to be able to buy a home in London. And that's not just a social crisis, it is a political crisis. It's an economic crisis. And I think that must define the next mayor and probably the one after that as well. So the challenge is taking that extraordinary success story that is Boris Johnson, and I have no doubt about that, but turning into something which translates into people's lives across the board. That's what the next mayor needs to do.
2 weeks ago, David Cameron was sitting in that chair talking about demolishing the big London estates and rebuilding housing there. And my question to him is the same question I put to you, is can you guarantee that for every council flat or council house that is demolished at a council rent, there will be at least one put back at the same kind of rent?
Well, I'm very excited by the estates regeneration agenda. I think,
yeah, but yes or no?
I'll answer the question. And I've said in my plan for London, which I published, not a manifesto, but it's a plan, and I make it very clear that I want to see the dilapidated, poorly designed estates from the 1950s and 60s regenerated with a commitment. First, that the communities have to agree. If there isn't a majority support in the community, I wouldn't want to progress with that. I've made that an absolute commitment. And that everyone who lives in those estates today would be able to return to a new home on the same estate, a better home at no extra cost.
At no extra cost. That is the crucial thing. So there will be enough social housing to replace the social housing being knocked
right.
down.
No one would be required to leave their home, and no one would be required to pay more. And I know that's possible because there are projects in this country.
Have you persuaded the Prime Minister of this?
Well, I'm hoping to be the mayor in 13 or 14 weeks' time, and this is something I can write into the London plan. But it's something which I think has the capacity to transform London.
I'm sure he and your party talk a lot about affordable housing, and we still haven't nailed down what that means. What is affordable housing?
Legally, affordable housing is a 20% discount, but in the real world, a 20% discount on a £600,000 home in Primrose Hill is not an affordable house to,
I think the average house price in London is now over £500,000. So on that reading, an affordable house would be £450,000, which would leave most people watching this programme gaping.
That's exactly the point. So a legal definition is not all that helpful. There needs to be one, but it's not all that helpful. But if for someone on an average London salary who can't afford an average priced home in London, or even a discounted average priced home, neither can they afford a social home. A social home for which they will never qualify is as unattainable as Roman Abramovich's mansion in Chelsea.
Right.
So the answer is not to polarize the debate between social homes and market homes. You have to build for people across the income spectrum. If you don't do that, then we're not going to resolve the housing crisis in London.
Okay, and the proposal to London at the moment is that we get rid of one old Etonian mayor from a very powerful family and bring in another old Etonian mayor from a very powerful family. What does that say about social division and social mobility in this country in 2020?
Look, I certainly would never hide from my background. I mean, this will be a theme of this election because of the campaign of my rival. But I've never shied away from the fact that I was dealt a very good hand in life. But equally, my record shows that I've, at every single moment of my adult life, sought to play that hand well. I've campaigned against injustice as an editor of The Ecologist magazine, as a backbench MP for the last 5 years. I've held government to account. I've delivered for my constituents. And you can see in the results of the last election that what was a Lib Dem seat, which you know well, has become a very safe Conservative seat.
And in turn, you have called him divisive and radical. Is that code for Muslim?
Absolutely not. And it is so clear that what's happened to the Labour Party now is one of the most radical things that's happened to politics, full stop, in my lifetime. We've seen this extraordinary revolution in Labour. We had the leader on this programme last week talking about wildcat strikes for London. It is an extraordinary radical proposal that Labour is putting forward, and Sadiq Khan is an architect of that. And I think to describe him and his party as radical is a no-brainer, and it's appalling that it's been deliberately misinterpreted.
Right, Zac Goldsmith, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
I've been getting away with it all